Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, the place you can learn something new about life in the Soviet Union. I'm your host, Sergei Sputnikov, the guy who was born in the USSR. Recently, I made several videos about unusual Soviet stores that did not accept Soviet rubles. One retail chain was called Berezka, spelled in English, and that was a souvenir shops for foreign tourists that accepted only so-called hard currency or hard converted currency, which means United States dollars, German Deutschmarks, and so on. It did not accept Soviet rubles. Another one was called also Berezka, but spelled in Russian, and Berezka once again means small birch tree. And that chain of stores was designed for Soviet citizens that worked overseas, and they received, instead of hard currency, the special funny money, look like monopoly money, called coupons or checks, and that's when they can exchange those for foreign goods, cigarettes, stereos, and so on. And we also had stores called Albatros, and those were located in the large port cities like Odessa, Kaliningrad, Leningrad, Riga, and those stores were designed specifically for Soviet sailors. I don't want to say seamen. And same thing, didn't accept Soviet rubles, only accepted special currency that was given to sailors who went and worked on the oceans out of the country. The mentioned above stores, Berezka and Albatros, operated from the mid-60s into the late 80s, so about 30 years. And most Soviet citizens generally knew about existence of such stores. They didn't have a chance to shop there, but they knew about hard currency Berezkas and checkaway Berezkas. In today's video, I'm going to tell you about another retail chain that existed in the Soviet Union back in 1930s, and interestingly enough, not many people knew about it, and Soviet historians were pretty mum about the history of this retail chain called Torgsin. And the way the Soviet history omitted mentioning Torgsin reminds me how Leo Trotsky was similarly omitted in the Soviet history. Like in this case, pretty much everyone knew the name of Trotsky, but if you look at any history book of the Soviet Union, he was never mentioned. His role was completely erased. But before I start my story about Torgsin, I would like to thank Elena Sokina. She's a professor of history from Moscow State University that currently works in the United States, and she actually wrote quite a few books about Torgsin. She's pretty much a specialist in the history of that retail chain. When I began researching for this topic, she was very kind to reply my Facebook message and give me a couple of pointers, and we had a good conversation, and she answered many of my questions. So thank you so much, Elena. And if you find topic of Torgsin interesting, Elena Sokina has the book available in English on Amazon. It's called Stalin's Quest for Gold, the Torgsin Hard Currency Shops and Soviet Industrialization. I'll provide the link in the comment section below. So Torgsin, it's another Soviet abbreviation, just like Gulag abbreviation, Государственное управление лагерей, State Management of Camps. And I hate when people say gulags when they talk about labor camps. There are no gulags, there was only one gulag, Государственное управление лагерей. Torgsin was abbreviation for торговля с иностранцами, trading with foreigners. Really simple, really easy to understand. We're just gonna trade with foreigners, nobody else. The first Torgsin store was opened in July of 1930 with the only purpose trading with foreigners, so they would sell only for hard currency and nothing else. So that's a pre-sequel to Berezka hard currency stores of the 70s and 80s. Initially, Torgsin stores were selling only antiques and also premium quality foodstuffs, so-called export quality foodstuffs that weren't available for regular purchase in the Soviet Union. There were also Torgsin shops in the main Soviet ports, and those places were serving foreign ships and foreign sailors. So kind of similar to Albatros stores, although Albatros was selling goods to the Soviet sailors, Torgsin was selling to foreign sailors. In order to understand the origins of Torgsin and to understand its crazy fast growth from one store in July of 1930 to 1,500 Torgsin shops all over the country by 1936, we need to look what else was going on in the Soviet Union at that time. First of all, 1930 was the third year of First five-year plan, which began in 1928 and ended in 1932. The first five-year plan was the beginning of massive and rapid industrialization of the Soviet Union. The Soviet government was spending millions of golden rubles, so real gold, purchasing equipment, technology, hiring foreign specialists, and purchasing the entire factories in the United States, United Kingdom, in France, Germany, and other countries. For example, just the deal with Ford Motor Company was worth $30 million in 1929. They purchased the entire factory that could produce 30,000 cars and 70,000 trucks, Model A and Model AA. And that was a great deal for Ford because they were switching to V8. So they sold all the old tools and dies to the Soviet Union at discount. And they did it right before the crash of 1929. On the top of $30 million that went to Ford, another $40 million went to Austin Company for designing and constructing the truck car factory in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, and they were supposed to be paid monthly from the Soviet gold reserves in Chase Bank in New York. And as I mentioned earlier, along with the equipment and factories, the Soviets hired thousands of foreign specialists. A lot of them were Americans, specialists, engineers, even workers, offering them double what they were making in the United States. And this is how our friend Robert Robinson ended up in the Soviet Union. He was offered double the pay that he was getting at Ford in Detroit. Another event that I could say shook the country was introducing or reintroducing of centralized card system in 1929, so-called карточная система. So that's pretty much when there was shortage on everything, especially food. So you couldn't purchase food. You can only get food by using special cards that were given to workers who had the right to consume 800 grams of bread per day, and members of the workers' family who were getting 400 grams of bread per day. Then from there on, there was a second category. Workers were getting 300 grams. Then if you were handicapped or retiree, you were getting only 200 grams per day. It's only using cards. And that system existed all the way till 1935. So we had the flood of foreign specialists coming to the Soviet Union and total shortage of everything in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet citizens had to use this card system, which means if you don't work, you don't get anything. So the main purpose of Torgsin stores was to provide foreign specialists with supplies, foods, and other goods being paid with foreign currency. Soviet people had no business in Torgsin stores initially. So the Torgsin, which once again meant trading with foreigners, торговля с иностранцами, would probably just remain what it was, as shops trading with foreigners, if not for the Wall Street crash of 1929, when the share prices on the New York Stock Exchange collapsed. And that created troubles for every country in the world, including Soviet Russia. As you may understand, the Soviet Union didn't have endless supply of gold. They did have some leftovers from the Tsar Russia, but a lot of it was lost or spent during the Civil War and the period after that when Soviet Union tried to ignite the world revolution. They spent a lot of gold in Western Europe trying to fire up revolutions there. And so the plan was to sell commodities, mostly grain, and use the money for selling commodities to pay for industrialization. In order to speed up grain exports, quite a few large grain elevators were erected and finished in the southern part of Ukraine in cities like Mykolaiv, Kherson, Odessa, located on the Dnieper River, so you can just load them on ships and ship it into Western Europe. And of course, we must mention that along with the first five-year plan, Stalin began the collectivization of the agricultural sector in the Soviet Union, and that's of course Ukraine, Russia, and other regions. So it was a perfect plan, perfect five-year plan. We grow a lot of grain using collective farms. We take the grain, ship it to the West, sell it for gold, spend gold on equipment, bring equipment and factories back in the Soviet Union, build giant factories, and continue our industrialization. Perfect 5-year plan. So the Soviet leadership confidently expected that the replacement of individual peasant farms by collective farms would immediately increase the food supply for the urban population and for the export, but it turned out that peasants had no excitement about joining collective farms. They were slaughtering their animals and they didn't want to join the collective farms, so everything went downhill there. To make matters worse, the crash of 1929 and following global depression pushed down prices for farm products approximately 60%, so suddenly Soviet Union faced this double whammy. They produced way less grain and prices collapsed on the world market. They didn't have enough money to continue industrialization. Stalin desperately needed a lot of gold and a lot of grain, and preferably a lot of both. Okay, my friends, this was a part 1 of Torgsin story. I hope you enjoyed the video, maybe learned something new. As always, please don't forget to like the video, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Sergei wrote a book based on diaries he made when he was first in the United States. And as I understand, this is just volume 1, right? That's correct. He's going to have multiple volumes coming out. Well, I said, well, since Sergei is kind enough to come up and speak with us, I bought the book. I said, I might as well read this. I read this in one sitting, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I just couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating because your writing is very compelling, for one, and his story is very interesting for two. It's very interesting. You know, we've lived here our whole lives. We don't have that perspective. It's just so interesting to hear someone else's perspective about what we take for granted. So I hope you really tune in and listen to what he has to say. It's a very interesting, very informed perspective. Sergei is not a historian. He's an electrical engineer by trade, but I find that he has a depth of understanding on history, economics, culture. So just a very observant fellow and a great storyteller. So